Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us almost this afternoon, or it could already be afternoon where you're at. I'm Colleen Rainey from the Loyal Business Leadership Hub. We're going to wait a few minutes because people are rolling in right now. So just hang tight. We'll get started soon.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'm John Caltagirone, founding director of the Loyola University Business Leadership Hub. And today we have a timely event, and that's why we have hundreds of people that have signed up for this event on hiring and retaining in your workplace. You're going to enjoy the panelists and the moderator today. Colleen Rainey, who I'm going to introduce in a few minutes, asked me to welcome you. And when I started thinking about this, what remarks I was going to say, I know I didn't have to worry about letting you know what exits to go out of in case of emergency. I didn't have to share with you where the restrooms are because I think you already know where that is. But what I do want to share with you for right now is the makeup of the Leadership Hub and our purpose. We have the following 7 centers. The Baumhart Center, which is involved with ethics and social enterprise. Family Business Center, just what that says. Colleen Center, which is executive and professional education. The Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center. Loyola Limited, which is a group of student-run businesses. Risk Management. And then the Supply Chain and Sustainability Center. And we also have 2 student groups. All of these groups are interdisciplinary, going across schools within Loyola. And we have a purpose. And I want to underline the word purpose. And that's to help the academic, government, and business communities with ethics, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, being that trusted advisor, coach, and mentor to them, and especially helping the underprivileged. We had an internal discussion whether we should have this event the day after Memorial Day. And Colleen and I felt it was a good idea, and apparently the individuals, the hundreds of them that have signed up, agreed with us. And because of that, I just want to take a moment to talk about Memorial Day. And this is right out of the dictionary. But Memorial Day is a federal holiday in the United States for honoring and mourning the military personnel who have died in the performance of their military duties while serving in the armed forces. This is a holiday observed on the last Monday of May. We don't go around saying Happy Memorial Day because this is remembrance to our loved ones, and it could be a father, it could be a sister, it could be an uncle, a grandfather, grandmother that served in the military. Many people visit cemeteries and memorials on Memorial Day to honor and mourn those who died while serving in the United States military. Many volunteers place American flags on graves of the military personnel. Memorial Day is also considered the unofficial date of summer. So now I want to get back to that word that I emphasize, purpose. What is our purpose? And I have a quote here that life is not measured in time, but in accomplishments. It is the people that you touch and the attitudes you change that matter. So I'm inviting all of you to come and join us at the Leadership Hub in Loyola University to help us with our mission and purpose. And one other quote that I want to have is an African proverb that I used quite a bit. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. It is my pleasure to introduce Colleen Rainey, the Director of the Executive and Professional Education Center. Colleen?
Thank you, John, so much for those warm and welcoming remarks. And thank you to all of us who are joining us globally. We appreciate you being here with us today. And we're going to dive right in because we have a lot of content that we'd like to share with you as a group. So first, I'd like to let you know that these are our panelists that will be speaking throughout the session. I'm going to minimize something for a second. There we go. So you'll hear from Wendy Fashing. She is the Senior Regional Engagement Leader at Amazon. Pete Norlander, who is Assistant Professor of HR at the Quinlan School of Business, and Laura Arteaga-Lama. She is the founder and CEO of Global South Strategies, LLC. I'm grateful to call all these individuals friends, and I'm glad they were able to join us today. But first, we're going to go ahead and set the tone in what is going on currently in the workforce. And so, Pete, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to go ahead and set the table for all of us today.
Okay, thank you very much, Colleen, and welcome to everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Pete Norlander, and I teach mostly in the human resources and employment relations area. So I'm excited to be here today to set the stage, as Colleen said, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our other panelists as well about what they're seeing out in the field, because this is such an evolving situation, rapidly changing, and no amount of statistics and headlines I'm going to read from the Wall Street Journal in this short presentation are going to be able to capture what's happening in this rapidly evolving situation. So Colleen, if you could go to the next slide, and just one more slide ahead, and I want to set the stage with a bit of a historical perspective here on where we are, where we've been. So the unemployment rate, as you know, is the percentage of workers in the labor force who do not have a job and are currently seeking a job. And prior to COVID, we had the longest economic boom in the United States, and the unemployment rate was under 5%. So that was a really hot labor market. If you remember back before COVID, those times, we had a long sustained period of economic growth. But where were we coming from? That long boom began only after the Great Recession, which was a really traumatic incident for the economy. And the recovery has been actually very painfully slow. If we look back to 2010 and how long it took to get below, let's say 5% unemployment, which is a good benchmark for a hot economy. Many macroeconomists say that the government's response, the stimulus packages and the demand side macroeconomic management was just too small. And this time it seems like policymakers have learned the lesson. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration responded to the COVID crisis with unprecedented levels of federal government support. And it seems like the lesson has been learned, and there's been a rapid rebound since COVID and this crisis. The drop in unemployment, the speed with which it went up and down are both unprecedented. So compared to 1 year ago, April 2020, when unemployment was 15% and 23 million people were actively seeking work, today it's 9.8 million and 6.1% unemployment. So it seems like we've made a lot of progress, but it is much more rapid than the Great Recession, indeed, definitely. But we're not back on the path we were on, right? We're not back down to sub 5% unemployment rates, and millions are still left behind. So if you could go to the next slide, I just want to talk for a minute about, in addition to the unemployed labor force, into the unemployed persons who are in the labor force actively seeking work, there are millions of people who have just dropped out of the labor force. So this happened also during the Great Recession, and there was a slow recovery back up. But we are now missing 6.7 million people from the labor force. Okay, a year ago it was 9.9 million. So again, we're doing better. Not in the labor force means that these are people who would like to have a job if they could get one, but they're not actively searching. They're kind of discouraged workers and they're out of the labor force. And so we have to think about, where did all those workers go? Where are they? Okay, as you're thinking about the hiring and the retention challenges you're facing, you've got to find some workers, and where are they going to be? It's in these two pools, the unemployed largely and the labor force dropouts. So a big question now is, are these short-term challenges or are these long-term challenges? Are you going to be facing the same issue in 6 months or a year? Or is this a phase that we're going through? And again, we're going to see that rapid recovery and rebound. So you can see it's slowing down a little bit as we move into 2021. But if you can go to the next slide, Colleen, I have a few thoughts now on the hiring and the retention challenges. So it seems like last time the lesson learned was that there needs to be an adequate demand side government response. So the government has responded this time. Now, are we facing supply side issues? Are there not enough workers simply in the labor force at this time? And is that creating pressure on wages and pressure to retain workers as more job openings are coming online? So many people may still be out of the labor force because of fears of COVID and childcare issues, as we'll see. And on the retention front, many people are actively seeking work because, again, the labor market is hot once again. So if we can go to the next slide, Colleen, I'll go through some of these hiring challenges. Now, the first thing I want to just talk about are those in-person jobs. And these have been particularly hard hit with COVID because, number one, people who have a health issue or who are living with someone with a health issue may still be uncomfortable returning to work. So for millions of people with health conditions or a relative who has health conditions, they're living at home, they may not want to go back to a job that requires them to be in person because it could still put someone who they live with at risk. In addition, we have not seen a complete return of all of the supports and fundamental things in society that make society run, such as in-person schooling, childcare. So millions of people, especially women, have dropped out of the labor force to, as needed, take care of children, aging parents. So when we think about the shortages in particular, they're concentrated largely in occupations or in industries where there are in-person jobs. So retail and entertainment and dining and hotels are all industries where they're now, having in the crisis had to lay off people because business shut down. As they're reopening and the demand has come back online, now where are the workers? So that's a key challenge for hiring. So if we want to move on to retention challenges, I'm arguing essentially here that this is linked with the hiring challenges. So why is it so hard to fill jobs? Why is it so hard to hire? The same reason it's hard to retain, because there are 3 open positions for every unemployed person in many states in the country. So if you look at this next slide, you can see that we are seeing the most vacancies in history, essentially. We're right back to where we were pre-COVID. The number of job openings in the United States, there's 7 million jobs open. It's a very hot labor market. Employees currently working for firms are also looking for jobs. So there are many unemployed people per job open, but I'm sorry, it's the other way around. There are many openings per unemployed person. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see how firms are starting to respond. So these are some Wall Street Journal articles from the last few weeks. So I'm glad we have Wendy here, who is from Amazon, but large firms are responding with unprecedented bonuses for hiring, $500 at McDonald's, $1,000 at Amazon, starting wages at $17 an hour. You've seen these headlines, you've seen these pictures, and essentially firms are responding by increasing the attractiveness of their wage offers. So that's good in a large sense, because for many years in the United States, we've had stagnant wages. We have not seen a long sustained period of economic growth since the 1990s, when middle-class wages rose. And that could, again, create a virtuous cycle where there are more people with more money in their pockets and they're spending more money. But it can also create this challenge where if there's not enough supply of labor, we're going to see other pressures coming into the economy. So if you could go to the next slide, Colleen, I want to offer, I don't think I really have solutions here, but I'm gonna pose the question as, can you wait it out? Can you wait until 6 months or a year from now, more people come back into the labor market who dropped out or who are currently unemployed? And I want to suggest that maybe that is not what we're going to see here. We may be returning to, or I would hope in some sense, getting to a place where we have a long sustained recovery. Now, the federal government has proposed, the Biden administration has proposed an enormous federal budget this year, $4.5 trillion, I believe. And the potential is that demand is going to remain really high. And even if on the supply side, all those workers come back into the labor market, we may be having a hotter economy than we did before. So with that, that could create a lot of pressure. Pressure is not seen in a generation to raise wages and to offer really good workplaces. So on the hiring front, let me just offer this suggestion that there's looking beyond the usual candidates. So relaxing requirements and making jobs more flexible, training workers who are not going to step into the position and have all of the requisite skills, and using technology to increase productivity, as we're already seeing with automation taking place. Now, on the retention side, for small firms, especially for firms that cannot necessarily offer the industry-leading wage, there are many ways to keep people happy, to be a great place to work, to keep people inside. So if you think about this, the bottom line, Colin, if you can advance one, the bottom line here is that supply shortages and this demand spike, I don't think is going to go away in 6 months or a year. So firms might want to develop a plan to make themselves a great employer, place where people want to stay, and be creative in thinking about how to hire. So if we can go to the next slide, let me offer some examples again from the last couple of weeks in the Wall Street Journal about how firms are taking this challenge on. If you can advance just one click. So companies are offering to reskill employees and train people in cutting edge areas like data science. So Levi's is offering a boot camp. This type of story is not going to be unusual in a hot labor market. Firms often hire workers who are not prepared to do the job that they're hired to do. They hire them because they think they have potential, and then they train them when the labor market is hot. So we're very used to thinking, oh, I'm going to hire the person who's going to step into the job tomorrow and be performing at 100% or 90%. But instead, firms are hiring people with potential and training them. So if you can go to the next slide, a few more examples of how firms are changing their requirements. So one thing, robots. Warehouses are using robots and automation to fill labor gaps and speed deliveries. Hybrid work. More firms are changing their employment relations policies and working manager by manager, employee by employee to renegotiate, well, what days are you going to come in? What days are you going to stay at home? How are we going to manage workload, ensure productivity and efficiency and results? And that is something that has to take place. And it's a difficult process, but I think ultimately it's going to lead to more satisfied workers, because a worker who's in a good arrangement is going to be very reluctant to give that up. And then the last one here, just as a background to this idea of relaxing requirements, there are a lot of firms that are not in industries or occupations where this is the most essential thing, but there are positive marijuana tests. There are other requirements that firms have around job credentials, around qualifications, around having a college degree, around any of these that may need to be relaxed in order to find candidates who can come into the job. So moving to the next slide, we're going to talk seriously for a moment about overlooked groups, because I think here is the largest opportunity. This graph on the right is a graph of, as a percentage of the unemployed, how many people have been unemployed for more than 6 months. Firms are often reluctant to hire from the long-term unemployed. This is an area I've researched. There's a stigma or a perception that unemployed people who have not been able to find a job are less qualified, are less productive, are lazy. They're just enjoying their jobless benefits. That is, especially during an environment in which unemployment has been historically unprecedented, it's just not true. So when firms, after the Great Recession, there's been a lot of research coming out of that. When firms hired from the long-term unemployed, they found that their workers were equally productive, but more loyal, and they stuck around longer. They were less likely to quit as a percentage, as a function of their pay. People facing discrimination in the labor market can make excellent employees. Populations that have higher unemployment rates, populations that are coming back into the labor force, and I'm speaking specifically about parents of children, of people who have caregiving responsibilities, of people who are from discriminated against minority groups. These populations are really a great target for hiring during a period in which there's a hot labor market. And that's exactly what a hot labor market should do. So moving on to retention challenges, or I'm sorry, retention solutions. I think these are related again to the hiring solutions, but Colleen, if you can go to the next slide, let me say first, just pay competitive wages, right? That's easy. Should you let an employee with another job offer leave? No, you should match it, right? Paying competitive wages is the easiest answer, but it's not possible for every firm, right? And that's just the fact. So I teach employee relations, not compensation. There are a whole bunch of ideas and solutions to make you a better place to work that don't cost a whole lot of money as a percentage of payroll or as a percentage of a firm. But first of all, Colleen, you can advance, be a great place to work by training managers. You know, are managers being flexible with employees? Are they treating them well? Are they responsive to employees, or are they only concerned about output? Having well-trained managers can save you a whole bunch of trouble on the employee relations front, can make your employees more productive, and can essentially keep your workforce that you have that's doing a good job intact. These times being as they are unprecedented, as we've heard so much, people have life going on outside of work. People have people to care for. And when employees have issues, you know, there's this article, Wall Street Journal, bosses aren't sure that remote workers still have the hustle. So believe people, okay? I cannot stress this enough. There's been a couple of studies, and it's still early. A lot of this stuff there aren't statistics for yet, but I think that we've shown over the last year that people can be as productive or more productive at home than in the workplace. And we just have to find ways to make this work. So being flexible, believing people as issues come up, but really trying to remember that they're a critical input into your organization's entire enterprise. Enhancing employee recognition programs. This is a simple way to recognize people for doing great work. Employee of the month, employee of the week, employee of the day, thank you, express gratitude, and appreciate people sincerely for what they're offering to your company or organization. Offering that flexibility, especially around work from home, and then offering community. That's something that people are really looking for after COVID, I think, celebrating those occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, and all of the contributions. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panel, and I want to thank you all for being here. And thanks, Colleen.
Thanks so much, Pete. This has been great information, and I love seeing the statistical charts of like what's been going on, the two parallels together. So moving on, we're going to go ahead and open up for our panel now. And so everybody knows a little bit about Pete. So we're going to go ahead and move to Wendy Fashing. Wendy, would you like to open your mic and introduce yourself to everyone?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Wendy Fashing. I'm one of the senior regionals at Amazon. I've been in staffing for over 12 years. I am currently responsible for the Midwest for all of our non-exempt hiring. My team focuses on the wonderful associates that make the day-to-day happen within our warehouse buildings. I'm located just south of Chicago. I am a mother of two lovely and lively little girls and a very proud Marine Corps wife. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Laura. Laura, are we still there?
Yep.
There we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Hi, how are you, Colleen?
Good.
Good. Well, I'm Laura Ortega. I'm actually joining everybody from Spain. It's 7-something in the evening here, and I am the managing partner for Global South Strategies. It's an advisory firm basically helping companies from Latin America, from the United States, and from Europe to externalize or settle and expand in any of those three markets in any direction, basically focusing on political risk and industrial partnerships, key partnerships, whether they are commercial or public and private as well. So using a lot of the support that it is provided by European Union funding, as well as other programs that we can find in the United States as well as in Latin America.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And everybody knows Dr. Pete, so I'm going to go ahead and just to let everybody know a little bit of logistics here. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. We have a couple that came in already that we'll go ahead and get started with. And the first question actually is for Pete, which you may have answered, but maybe if you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive, you know, how are the current HR trends helping companies recruit right now?
This may be for me, but I haven't been doing HR recruitment for a long time. So I used to work in HR recruitment, but I think there are promising trends around online search. Companies have been very flexible, offering remote interviews, for example, and that whole process, I was speaking with someone, an executive who does recruitment, that with COVID, they had to move their entire process from paper, and it was still on paper, yes, to electronic and online. And so doing that transition is enabling companies to more rapidly screen and process candidates. But I turn that over to those in the field.
Absolutely. I think to your point, Pete, you know, one of the things that spawned this idea of having the webinar was the entry-level workforce. People were having a challenge of finding them. At the same time, we were hearing from clients is that the middle management, whether they're supervisors, managers, or above, were actually leaving their job because there was new opportunity out there. They've made it through the pandemic with their current employer, and now they were jumping ship and going to another opportunity. And I thought, well, these two worlds are now colliding, so let's put this all together in one good webinar. So thank you very much for your background. Let me move it over to Wendy. So, you know, currently, you know, what are some current trends that you're hearing either from applicants or from some of your workforce that you have right now?
Yeah, I think we're quickly finding that number one, none of us really know what the candidates are going to expect, want, and need coming out of a pandemic. So a lot of this has a question mark around it. But I think one thing that we're finding very quickly is, especially for non-exempt hiring, it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach to hiring. And it goes back to not just designing your business to be flexible, have a flexible staffing model or have a flexible business model, but you have to be willing to kind of meet the candidates where they are. Some candidates enjoy or applicants enjoy a completely virtual process. So, you know, we are currently exploring, you know, what that would look like. And then there's others that want to come into an office, want to talk to someone about what the day in the life is like at Amazon, maybe get some help with the application process, you know, utilize a laptop, but just have that one-on-one connectivity with a person. So again, I think we're quickly finding it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. On the exempt side, we're finding that a lot of the feedback hasn't changed, and that candidates still want follow-up from submitting a resume. They don't want to go back into a black hole. The speed of the interview is really important, both the speed of getting the interview set up and the follow-up is still really critical. So, you know, again, focusing on making sure that the interview is set up within 1 week. And then Amazon does have a really hard and fast rule around following up after a phone screen within 2 days, and then following up within 5 days after the interview, the remote interview. And I know that's an industry best practice, but that's something that we have adopted and continues to be a best practice despite all of the other changes that we've been experiencing.
That's great. Yeah, and it's, you know, when we're hearing from candidates or different companies, clients rather, different companies talking about how people are leaving they're not retaining their workforce and they're leaving right now, it's actually giving managers and supervisors a moment to pause to find out what skill set they needed from a remote workforce that maybe they didn't need before. Maybe you do need somebody on your team that has more technology skills. Like when you mentioned about the laptop, you might need somebody who needs more technology skills than ever before. So that's great to hear, and especially the distinction between your exempted and non-exempt hiring as well. Mm-hmm. So let me talk to Laura here for a minute. So Laura, overall, what are some international trends that you're hearing about hiring and retaining workforce? Like, is this just a US issue that we're all talking about, or is this something that you're seeing globally?
Well, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Internationally, the picture it's very different, because the impact and speed of the recovery, and especially the vaccination efforts, are wildly different in many regions. So that makes the economic recovery and therefore the impact in employment, working at different speeds. So you can see, we go around the world, you have, China, the United States, basically countries where economic recovery is full V-shape, and you have, growth and slowly catching up the supply, and as supply chains are basically in the labor market is recomposing. Then you have Europe, that we are definitely leaving the fourth wave, and you can see, the light at the end of the tunnel, but we are far from full recovery, especially because of the economic structure, the type of economies that we have in different countries are different. So you cannot compare Spain with Germany, or the UK with Greece. So it's going to depend on, whether you have a more contact-free or contact-intensive type of activities, where you are going to have more service versus manufacturing industry, where you are going to have more informal versus formal economic sort of share of your GDP, and therefore employment. So all those things are going to vary, and therefore have a different outcome in terms of the impact, or in terms of the trend. Nonetheless, like I said, in Europe, we can start seeing a little bit of trends that we can talk a little bit afterwards, that pretty much, I think, track down some of the things that we see overall globally and right now in the United States. Then if we go to, places like India, they are in full health crisis and lockdown. So the situation is so uncertain that at this point we cannot assess yet the impact in employment, and what those, what the labor market is going to look like after this. And then Latin America, that I work with that region a lot. It's still, battling the virus, and except for Chile, most of the countries have a very low levels of vaccination and therefore immunity, and you can still having lockdowns. So like in Argentina, they're back into 3 weeks. So economic recovery and economic activity is far from being full, and in terms of the employment, not many people in that region, for several reasons, could telework. Mostly because the activities that most of the activities that contribute to the GDP are, direct contact or intensive in terms of contact, and therefore cannot be moved to your house, basically. And another thing that is very important from my standpoint, affecting Latin America as well as Africa, is the lack of access to infrastructure, where you actually have access to broadband, and therefore have the flexibility that Peter was talking before. Just to give you a statistic, for example, fewer people work in remotely or perform jobs remotely In Latin America, only less than 20% of people can actually do that versus emerging markets in Europe and or Asia, where that percentage is between 30 and 50%. So therefore, Latin America, as an example, will be, and Africa will be one of the markets that are more impacted by COVID-19 and employment. And because of that, those nuances, basically, we are going to see a very different speed in terms of what happened. And also, even though we can find commonalities in terms of the trends, the impact of those trends are going to be different in each region, just because the institutional and the infrastructure capacities are different. The support, the public policy support that we see in those countries is different. And just because the intensity of the health crisis and the economic recovery obviously is going to be also different. And then we can go into commonalities if you wanna discuss what I see.
Yeah, I'd like to stay there for a second and talk about, you mentioned around policy. I have a couple other notes here, but you mentioned around policy in particular. Are you noticing any other governments with stimulus checks across the nation or anything like that? Share your experience and what you've heard.
Yeah, in terms of public support, it has been across the globe. Basically, you see European Union actually getting together and putting a huge package for post-COVID recovery, as well as for digitalization and innovation, so that countries like the ones in the southern flank basically can change their production models, basically, or at least accelerate the levels of automation, digitalization, etc., and having a more even economic makeup in terms of services that they are like hospitality, tourism, etc., and also have a more robust industry, especially industries that had to do with green energy support and with infrastructure, with innovation and technology being brought up also to the rural areas, as a lot of people have moved from the cities to the towns, basically in the countryside, as a result of the pandemic. So those trends are pretty much in line with what's going on in the United States. I think it's just the speed of what is happening here. The difference is going to be on the capacity in terms of the fiscal capacity or the monetary, wiggle room that certain areas are going to have. So the United States and Europe may have, resources in order to do that, and also institutional strength to implement those kind of programs, whereas other regions, like I mentioned before, in Latin America, or especially emerging market, but Africa or Latin America, they have less capacity, in those terms, and therefore the help is not going to be as supporting as it could.
Yeah. And this is great to hear also the international perspective. We have clients all over the globe that we talk to your point about the vaccination rollout. I talked to a client last week and she mentioned that they were in a very small niche. For us, it was these big chunks of people that were eligible for vaccinations. And she said, well, this week we're on ages 38 and 39. I was like, ages? And she said, yeah, it was just going to be those 2 years. And then it would continue to roll out. And their challenge was to make sure that the younger individuals, 30 and under were able to get their vaccinations prior to schools reopening. And if that didn't happen, what additional challenges would that make for their workforce? So that was one perspective. And to the other part about retention, Pete, I talked to a client this morning out of the DC area, and they were mentioning around there was a DC worker strike this weekend for a lot of the frontline staff because they wanted to increase wages. Typically here in Illinois, it's around $15, $16 an hour that we're seeing, but theirs was $12 an hour, wanting to increase to $15. And it just made me think about small business owners out in those areas who needed that frontline staff in to reopen safely, but yet they may not have budgeted for the capacity of a pay increase like this. So have you seen any research on your end around like the frontline staff for small business owners and how they're treading this right now?
What I've seen on, so first, just direct action, there's been a wave of COVID-related employee actions, proto-unions, union efforts, but also below that level, a lot of employee relations stuff happening. Just that doesn't rise up to the level of workers saying, we're going to go on a walkout, we're going to go on a strike, we're going to organize union. Just a lot of people, and I think Wendy alluded to this earlier, bringing their situation forward to the managers that they're working with and saying, I have this issue, can you help me? And then if the answer is no, then the options are really exit or try to change the workplace. And so you have a lot of demand for just people feeling pain, needing to have issues resolved around, wages, around working conditions, around flexibility, and they're voicing those issues a lot at work on the frontline workforce. I think in Chicago, the key example of this was during the middle of one of the more severe periods of COVID. We had a potential for a hospital workers strike, which would be devastating to the operations of the system. But the workers on the front lines, the ones who are in there every day, were saying, we can't continue to go into work tomorrow if we're going to face what we're facing. So certainly there's been a lot of activism of employees internally, and we've heard about some of that in the news media as well when it rises to that level of employee action.
Absolutely. I would think as a researcher right now, this is like a living case study for you, right, Pete, to kind of like see what's going on and observe what's going on in the world right now.
Well, yeah. I'm doing a research project right now. I just started looking at job postings and what jobs offer work from home and not. And I have no results, but a lot of interesting data.
All right. Well, stay tuned for that for sure. To that point, though, I think it's this challenge right now presents a great opportunity for, I would assume, corporations to kind of look at their flexible work policy, not just for the well-being of their staff, but also for their recruitment opportunities, that if it's not an in-person job, that they could be recruiting globally for some of these positions that are available to them. So I'm trying to always look at the bright side of everything, as many of you know. So I'm trying to think this is a good opportunity. So tossing over to Wendy for a minute. So we talked a little bit, well, Pete talked a little bit about what Amazon's doing to recruit some of your staffing needs, but how are you guys talking about retaining some of the staff that you currently have? Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. And we talk about financial incentives, but I can tell you that's not the silver bullet, right? It really is a multi-pronged approach. And the one thing I would encourage any organization to consider is, are you measuring the voice of your candidate or the voice of your employee? Because if you don't have a way to measure or understand what they expect or need, you're not going to be able to actually get things done. So we have a saying on my team that what gets measured gets done. So if you don't have a way of understanding the voice of your employee, I encourage you to kind of prioritize that as a first step to implementation. And then really from there, I mean, more specifically for us, it's the first 7 days in terms of training. And I know this was in Peter's slide, that training is really key. So the first 7 days, just having a good experience when they arrive. I mean, walking into an Amazon building can be, intimidating. There's a lot of machinery. It's, some of the buildings are noisier than others. It kind of depends where you're working. So we just want to make sure that when they show up, that they are greeted, that they have a good understanding of what the expectation is within their first week. And then that there is that transition of working with like a learning and development team, all the way down to having a new hire ambassador that's going to really be with them during the most critical time, which is, first walking in the doors and getting up to speed and walking through what their ramp up time looks like. So I would say investing in your leaders and ensuring that they have a full understanding of what success looks like from the employee's perspective. And then the best way to get that is to have mechanisms in place that's going to capture that employee feedback.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, one time I heard an amazing professor say, make sure when you're hiring for culture, not just necessarily for skills, because you can always train on skills, but you can't train on culture fit. So I think that's great that you're immersing people right away into the culture. And to that point, a mentorship program has been great ways of retaining individuals, getting them aligned with somebody internally within the organization. And then, like I said before, the pandemic has also, switching to remote work has also shown people what skills gaps they have on their team. Maybe you can level up some of the skill sets that you have on your current team through training and development in order for them you could retain that workforce and keep them with you. Because Pete probably could give you a million statistics on this, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's much cheaper to retain your current workforce than it is for you to hire externally. Correct, Pete?
100%.
Okay, that's what I thought. Good. So what we're going to do right now is open it up. We've got a couple of questions that have flown into the chat feature here. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to open this up to the Q&A section. Let me pop this out for a second. Oh, one of the things I wanted to remind you all of is if you are interested in hiring a Loyola student, or it should say, or alumnus of the university, please check out Loyola's Handshake. This is a system you can go on in, you can populate if you're looking for any students or alumni. Feel free to utilize the Handshake system. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you get those jobs posted and get them open to any students. But what I wanted to do right now is open it up for the Q&A section. And panelists, all of you can see these questions if you go to the toolbar. So if you see one that you can answer, feel free to go ahead and do so. I know there's one here directed directly at Wendy. It's around onboarding in virtual environments. And I don't know if you do that or how you do that.
Yeah, so, first off, I think if you're looking to move to a hybrid hiring model and you want to explore virtual hiring, know that it's likely a phased approach. In many situations, depending on what type of software platform you operate off of, or just where you're at with your hiring process in general, it could require a tech enhancement. I'm not prepared to share the exact process today because, quite honestly, we're still in a pilot. Amazon, just like everyone else, takes things in a phased approach. But one thing that we did move to last year was, when March and April came around, we used to bring the candidates into one of our recruiting centers, and they had the opportunity to watch an Amazon new hire video, and the video was about 30 minutes and walked them through what to expect at their first day of Amazon. And then we shifted that video, and it's now part of our application process. There's also we went ahead and built into our application process a day in the life within the specific job that they're applying to. So not just giving them a firsthand look at what it's like to be an Amazonian, but then also what is their job actually going to look like that they've applied to. So kind of giving them a more realistic job preview. Those two things last year were moved to a virtual environment. And then we're going to kind of continue to explore what that looks like. But again, like putting the right data and the right measurements in place to make sure that it's the right decision for our candidates, and we're removing the friction from the hiring process, not adding to it. And that's what we're trying to learn right now.
That's great. Yeah, and I think to your point too, you know, you've been a recruiter for a long time, and so and many times when you're hiring for remote positions, you have to do remote onboarding either. But I think there's a lot more thought and intent post-pandemic that people are putting into it, or corporations are putting into it. So that's great.
Yeah.
Randy, I see your question popped up here. Hi, Randy. Nice to see you on the call with us today. So Pete is typing in a answer for you around millennials jumping from multiple positions. I'd almost challenge that to say, I think a lot of people are maybe moving, no matter what generation they fall within, to that people are jumping a little bit right now if they feel like they have an opportunity there. So I get, Pete already answered that one, so you'll see that answer pop up as well. Let's see some of the other. Laura, I think there's a question on here about international young graduates. If you want to go ahead and take that question.
Yeah, actually, it's a perfect question, because I wanted to address some of the things that Wendy and Peter said in your comment about the opportunity that this new flexibility does in terms of opening the pool of talent to any country, anywhere, really. So this is it's a great opportunity, even though it has several, you know, positive and a negative impact in certain regions where you have companies like, you know, Google, Amazon, you know, any of the big names that you can think of in terms of technology, finance, etc., insurance, etc., looking into highly competitive engineers, IT, you know, professionals from really hot places like, you know, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Europe, in various specific biosciences, etc., that are being hired from those multinationals. And this is great, obviously, with fantastic conditions. This is also happening with health workers and from different countries. And in a way, the negative impact, it is being stock out countries of their best talent. And, you know, and also that small and medium-sized companies, like you were saying, cannot afford to pay the prices that are being paid right now in markets like the United States for that kind of jobs. So, like I said, it's a great opportunity for everybody from the standpoint of the employee that definitely has the upper hand, I think, in this market globally. But at the same time, from a perspective of country, it is there is a risk of brain, you know, I guess, fly, you know, in terms of the best people being hired out and, you know, in working for companies outside of the country. So, you know, responding to the person that made the student that made the question, it is great for graduate students because now they are, you know, basically opening the window of employment to any country, any sector. They are specialized, and it could be a fantastic fit, especially for multinationals that require that culture understanding that you were saying, Colleen, that is not just the skill, but also the cultural understanding of the market where they try to either penetrate or expand their business. However, like I said, you know, that might have a negative impact country-wise.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. There's a question in here around minimum wage adjustments. I don't know how to quite answer this, William, but Pete, I'd like, if you could share any knowledge that you have of how minimum wages are set or if you know at all how the minimum wages are set. And if you don't, you could say you don't know, and we will find the answer for you, William. But Pete, I'm gonna send that.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the question up on the chat, but
Sure.
I'm happy to. Okay, I get it. Right. So the minimum wage has not kept up pace with productivity, and it hasn't kept up pace with inflation. The trend since 1980, that's the federal minimum wage I'm talking about. Had it kept up with inflation, it would be about $15 an hour today. But what you see in city and state after state is that the cities and states are raising their minimum wages, and companies, unprecedented, have also been internally raising minimum wages. So they say, we as a company are not going to pay any job less than, I think Walmart a few years ago announced $10 an hour, and it's a big deal. Now, I like the question from Sandra also about equity, because that raised a whole lot of equity issues when companies raised internal wages, and people who were making $10.50 or just above that threshold, and they'd been there for 10 years and they'd worked their way up, suddenly we're feeling like this is a very inequitable situation. And I guess the question for a lot of companies in all of these difficult ethical choices really is going to be, and to some degree, there's an employee relations question here also of who are we going to retain and keep happy, and who are we going to alienate in some sense, and how, are we going to deal with that? So one thing that happens is when Walmart and other companies have raised their internal wages, they raise wages for everyone else as well. It's not just at the bottom that it comes up, and that happens with cities and states raising their minimum wages. Everyone's wages go up a notch, and prices rise too. I think the real question about inflation is, are wages going to rise up faster than other prices, or are the real income of people, are people really going to be living better lives, or are they going to be spending more money and earning less? It's a tough question. Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks, Pete. Wendy, there's a comment here about onboarding in virtual environments. Oh no, we've already done that one. I just kidding. I think you answered one of them already. Moderator fail. Let's see what else. We got the minimum wage questions in. How do you make the offer more appealing to staff? Okay, so I have had this question come. So in previous life, I was a career advisor for years. And so one of the questions people said is, how do they negotiate their offer? They're given an offer, but I have heard of employees offering in the flex time, which is definitely more needed nowadays. But I've also seen employees offer in if there's a gym on site at their location, that the gym is complimentary. Or I've seen people talk about if they have on-site childcare and what the reduced rates are for that. So I'd like to hear from any of you, other things that you've seen that to make the offer more appealing to potential staff. Anybody?
I think you're spot on, Colleen, with the flexible work environment. That really is key. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there was a small family-owned business, and they went from having 3 shifts to I think it was 16 to 18 different shifts, part-time to full-time, kind of around-the-clock hours, knowing that the daytime hours are always going to be the more desirable. So I think that's a big part of it, but I also want to encourage everyone to continue to say the offer is definitely going to get them in the door, but always, and I think this kind of came up in another question about a recruiting strategy, and I always am cautious about recommending that you look at a recruiting strategy that's going to either cost more money or is maybe something above and beyond what you do today if you haven't inspected your hiring process to start, right? You really want to make sure that the friction within your hiring process is removed and the application is easy to get through, because with every click of the application that they have to take, every page they have to go to, there's fallout. So keep in mind that if you have a compelling offer that's going to get them in the door, you can, spend additional money on a recruitment strategy. But if they can't actually get through the application process and that part's not easy, then it's all for nothing.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question here. What is a suggestion for an employee who's looking to switch career paths during the pandemic? Would you say hiring standards are more lax? From what we have heard, no, hiring standards are not more lax, in the fact that what we have seen is companies are now looking for different skill sets in positions that maybe they were looking for otherwise, that they need somebody who has amazing interpersonal skills, both virtually and in person. It's not just that you have great, presentation skills in front of a room, like say you're sales and you have to be able to do sales virtually as well as sales in person. So that's the perspective that we've seen, but I'd love to open that to all of you. Have you seen any hiring standards that are a little bit more laxed, or are they on par? Or are they a little bit more stricter than before?
I'll jump in and say one of the reasons I think there are 3 open positions for every candidate is because firms have not relaxed their standards, and they're still looking for the unicorn, the perfect candidate who fits and checks off every box. I think as we see, a lot of people are in wait and see mode. Is this going to be 6 months or a year, or how long of a tight labor market? If the unemployment rate drops below 5%, stays below 5%, I'd expect firms to start dropping some of those requirements and offering more training or offering different requirements to get in the door. But I'd agree with what Colleen said.
Okay, excellent. Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, Laura. Go right ahead.
No. I agree with Wendy and Peter. I don't think it's an issue. The issue is lowering the standards, is offering a better deal, and I don't think it's not just about the money. It's about the intangibles, and I think after the pandemic, what we see is a change in behavior of all economic agents, and that includes the employee that had a chance to assess, different priorities, and also experience how their jobs can be done in different ways. And I think the result of that is not just the way we do jobs, but what job is in itself. And that, I think, has changed the approach of employees in terms of what they want to do, what kind of exchange, I want to have, it's not just about the money. Like I said, it's just about what else work does for me. And I think from that perspective, you construe basically a system and a process for hiring and retaining and continuously working in mentoring, that employee, I think. And I think that is sort of the framework of the paradigm.
Yeah, and, to that point too, Laura, there was, Pete, you talked about forgotten workforces, but there was a whole bunch of people that started new jobs throughout the pandemic in a virtual environment too. And so, God willing, I hope we don't see another wave of those individuals noticing now that there's not a cultural fit for them within those organizations and decide that they're going to re-enter into the employment, cycle again. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see, right? Isn't that the words of 2021? We're going to wait and see. And I hope all of you have learned some new information today as well. I'm grateful to all of our panelists, and I'm going to send it back to John for some closing remarks right now.
Thank you, Colleen. And that was exciting. Wendy, Laura, Peter, great job. We want to thank you for your expertise, and I'm sure we could have spent another few hours on this. And I also want to take a second here to thank Peyton and Aranza, who have helped in the background, as well as our marketing department of the Hub, and special thanks to Colleen Rainey for putting this together. I'm wondering what the new normal is going to be as far as the workplace. I know that Microsoft is telling their employees, you're going to be able to stay at home and work from home. Wendy's is coming to a decision on whether they're going to have any in-person dining. They're looking at just drive-through. And, we talked a lot, Colleen talked about handshake. We talked about hiring and that. And, one of the things I like to say about hiring is ask yourself 3 questions. what are you going to do every day when you walk in? Second, what's the package and benefits? But third is the most important. And I think all three panelists and our moderator, Colleen, hit on this. Who are you working for? Who are you working with? And who's reporting to you? And you talked about culture. You talked about how they treat people. Do they treat their employees the same way as they treat customers and suppliers, which I think would be great. So with that, I'm going to leave you with some thoughts. Again, handshake, if you want to take a look at what's going on there and you have a job to fill. We have plenty of interns we could help you with. We have alumni that may be looking for another opportunity as far as an employee. Let us know if you want to get involved with a roundtable, a focus group. And what we really also care about is thought leadership. So if there's something you want to join us with that, whether it's an article, whether it's research or a study, we'd love to be talking with you. So thank you very much. Everybody have a great afternoon and a great evening, and stay in touch with us, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for attending.